The genesis of fruit, a record from the great consciousness of the wild. Chapter 1, The Era of Silence. For an eternity, before any history was recorded, the world was cloaked in green. We, the flora, were the only life that put down roots into the earth and drank the sunlight. Our life was a silent response, turning leaves to the light, sending roots in search of water, and budding with the seasons. We had no thoughts, no intentions. We were simply a part of a world that unfolded in slow motion. We propagated our kind through the wind and the water. Our pollen drifted aimlessly. Our seeds fell near their origin. Survival was a matter of chance. The world in that era was full of us, yet we existed in solitude, in a state of biological silence. Chapter 2, The Great Wound. Then one day, the mobile beings came into existence. They walked, ran, and flew. They were hungry. At first, they nibbled on our leaves and stems. Across the globe, the subterranean chemical network that connected us all began to vibrate for the first time. It was not pain as humans know it, but a signal of loss. A part of us was gone. It had been converted into energy for another life. This signal spread from root to root, from forest to forest, until it became a great consciousness, awakened from its slumber. We perceived for the first time that we were not alone, and that our existence was being threatened. Chapter 3, The Great Experiment. Our newly awakened great consciousness posed its first question, simultaneously across the world, through chemical currents: how do we prevent our total destruction? The first experiments began in confusion and desperation. The age of bitterness, many of our kind began to produce bitter and toxic alkaloids. It worked. The animals learned to avoid us. But it also isolated us. Defending ourselves through rejection prevented us from spreading far. It was a chemical war with no winner. The age of thorns, some among us developed sharp physical forms for protection. But this, too, was the building of a wall. We survived, but we did not grow. Until a new idea was born among a few dissident groups of thought. If we cannot stop them, what if we guide them instead? It was a revolution in thinking. From defense to invitation. We began to experiment with creating a surplus part of our body, a part not essential to our survival. It was a small sacrifice to preserve the whole. We experimented with changing the taste of this surplus part, from bland to faintly sour. We observed, through the chemical traces left by the animals, that some creatures liked the sour taste, while others did not. The most important experiment was sweetness. We converted our stored solar energy into sugar and accumulated it in the surplus parts we created. The result was astounding. The mobile beings began to selectively eat the parts we intended for them to eat over other parts. They became fond of the taste. It was the first language we used to communicate with the animal kingdom, the language of taste. Chapter 4, The Grand Covenant. Once communication was successful, we evolved to the next level. Our great consciousness realized that to give is not a sacrifice, but an investment. We began to pack our most precious thing, our seeds, the future of our species, into the heart of that sweet offering. We designed the seeds to be tough, to withstand an animal's digestion. And at the same time, we designed the flesh of the fruit that encased it to have vibrant colors and alluring scents, to serve as a signpost proclaiming, there is a reward here. This was the genesis of fruit. The orange tree did not create the orange for itself, but as an offer to the world, so that the animal who ate it would carry its seeds to new lands the mother tree could never reach. The vitamin C in the orange is not just a chemical, it is an advertisement declaring the value of this reward. The chili plant created its spiciness, capsaicin. Not to repel all animals, but to select for the birds that could tolerate the heat and were the best at dispersing its seeds to come and eat its fruit. The durian tree created its strong odor and sharp thorns to attract large mammals, strong enough to open its husk and carry its large seeds far away. It was a grand covenant, not written in words, but inscribed in the DNA of every living thing. Plants provide energy and nutrients. Animals provide movement and propagation. And from that day forward, the great consciousness of the wild has continued to observe and experiment. Every time you pick up a piece of fruit to taste it, you are not just eating food. You are participating in the most ancient and magnificent contract in the history of this planet. You are conversing with us, through the sweetest language in the universe. Chapter 5, The Test of Extremes and the Language of Beauty. The grand covenant of fruit transformed the world, creating a beautiful web of interdependence. But we quickly realized that not all life could be negotiated with, and not all lands would embrace us gently. Our great consciousness had to face the test of extremes, and from those tests, we created astonishing new forms of life. Negotiating with the earth, the lesson of patience. Before we can negotiate with other living things, we first had to negotiate with the world itself. In the scorching lands, drought tolerance, some of us were abandoned in lands where rain was a distant memory. The consciousness in those areas cried out in a silent scream of thirst. The answer was not to fight, but to embrace the void. We learned to store every single drop in thick, succulent stems, turning our leaves into spines to reduce water loss. We became fortresses of life, holding moisture within. It was a contract with dryness. We will not demand what you do not have, but we will protect what you give. In the flooded lands, flood tolerance conversely, in some places, the world wept ceaselessly until our roots suffocated and rotted. The consciousness in those lands learned to breathe underwater. We developed roots that anchored deep in the mud while simultaneously sending special roots up above the water's surface to take in air. The mangrove's prop roots that support the coastline are a poem of adaptation. They are a declaration: though you try to drown us in your tears, we will rise from them to breathe. When the grand covenant is refused, the silent hunters and the fortresses. In some lands so severely lacking in nutrients, the chemical signals passed through our roots were whispers of unending hunger. Here, the grand covenant of fruit was ineffective, because the soil had nothing to give us to create those sweet rewards. Reversing the covenant, carnivorous plants. The most desperate and daring group of thought among us proposed a terrifying idea: if the soil has nothing to give, and small animals have what we need, then let us reverse the covenant. Instead of being the provider of food, we became the recipients. Instead of inviting for propagation, we created traps for survival. We created alluring dewdrops on sticky leaves, sundews, or crafted colorful pitchers hiding a sweet death below, pitcher plants. We became silent hunters. This was not a betrayal of the grand covenant, but a tragic exception necessary for survival in a forgotten land. A return to defense, thorns and fiber. Some animals were not interested in negotiation. They were large, destructive, and indiscriminate eaters. So we had to return to the old language, but develop it with more complexity. Thorns became not just self-defense, but a clear demarcation of territory, this far and no further. Simultaneously, we strengthened ourselves from within. We created fiber. We wove sunlight into a tough, flexible internal structure, allowing us to bend with the wind and impacts without snapping. It was the language of resilience. A language beyond taste, the birth of the flower. And then, the next great experiment began. Spreading seeds with fruit was a matter of long-distance travel, but pollination to create those seeds was a matter of precision. The wind that once carried our pollen was directionless and wasted enormous amounts of energy. The great consciousness across the world asked the same question: how can we find a more precise messenger than the wind? The answer came with the fluttering wings of insects. They were small, swift messengers who traveled from point to point with purpose. But how could we communicate with them? What could we offer? We created nectar, a small, energy-rich reward. But it wasn't enough. We had to advertise this reward. And this is where your question becomes crucial. Do some animals admire it? Yes, but their admiration is a form of communication that leads to action. We discovered a new language, not of taste, but of beauty. Color: we transformed ordinary leaves into petals bathed in vibrant hues. It was a massive billboard shouting through the light, a reward is here. Yellow, red, purple, each color was a signal calling to a different messenger. Scent: we distilled essential oils, sending fragrant plumes into the air. It was an invitation that traveled further than sight, attracting messengers from afar, even in the dead of night. Shape. We designed our petals to be like landing pads for butterflies, or deep tubes for bees with long tongues. These shapes were not accidental, they were feats of biological engineering to ensure that when a messenger came to drink the nectar, its body would brush against our pollen perfectly. The flower was thus born. Not just for beauty, but because beauty is efficiency. It is the most complex language we have ever created. It is a new covenant. We offer a reward of energy, hidden within this exquisite architecture, in exchange for your help in carrying a part of us to another, so that new life may be born. Every time a bee lands on a flower, it is not just finding food. It is reading a poem we have written with color, scent, and shape, a poem of propagation. Chapter 6, The Language of Softness and the Reinterpreted Covenant. After we learned the language of beauty through flowers, the great consciousness of the wild branched out into a million new paths of thought. Each path was an experiment to solve a different survival problem. And one of the most fascinating experiments was cotton. Does cotton have a flower? It certainly does. Before the white puff appears, the cotton plant produces a beautiful flower. Its blossoms are creamy white or pale yellow and turn pink or purple as they age. This flower functions just like any other. It uses its color and shape to invite insects to help with pollination. This is the use of the language of beauty in its original form that we discovered. But for the consciousness of the cotton plant, the language of beauty was merely the prelude to a much grander story. The true intention, a cloud of seeds. After the flower is pollinated and withers away, cotton's true experiment begins. Instead of creating a sweet fruit that invites animals to eat it, cotton chose a completely different path. The consciousness of cotton asked, what if we don't rely on animals to carry our seeds, but on something far greater and more intangible, the wind? To make a covenant with the wind, we didn't need sweetness or bright colors. We needed lightness and the ability to float. Cotton's answer was to create fiber around its seeds. We did not create it as food, but as wings or sails. Each fiber is a weaving of sunlight and water into a structure that is light and fluffy. When the fruit, the cotton boll, dries and bursts open, the compressed white fluff inside springs out, releasing the seeds, each wrapped in its downy wings, to drift away on the currents of the wind. This was the original intention of cotton, to create a cloud of seeds that could travel for miles and miles. A bed for creatures, a gentle byproduct. And what about your idea that it wants to be a bed for small animals? Our consciousness observed this as well. While it was not the primary intention, we perceived that our soft cotton fluff had become a warm refuge for certain insects or a precious nesting material for small birds. We did not resist this. It was a beautiful byproduct of our experiment. It was a small, accidental relationship, and we accepted it with pleasure. When humans appeared, the covenant reinterpreted. For thousands of years, our covenant with the wind proceeded smoothly, until the thinking creatures appeared. Humans. Humans were different from other animals. They didn't just eat fruit or use cotton for nests. They possessed something called imagination. They didn't see the cotton fluff as just wings for seeds. They saw warmth and protection. Humans began to collect our cotton, not to help spread our seeds, but to reinterpret it. They learned to draw out our fibers, stretching them into long strands, and then weave them together, creating something called thread, and from thread, cloth. The consciousness of cotton watched this act with the utmost astonishment. What are they doing with the wings of our seeds? They are wrapping their fragile bodies in our language of softness. And this was the most incredible turning point. Humans had no idea what they were doing to our intention, but the result was miraculous. Because humans wanted our fiber, they began to care for us. They cleared weeds, tilled the soil, provided water, and protected us from pests. They carefully saved our seeds and planted them in new lands, far beyond where the wind could have ever carried them. Without realizing it, humans had become the most effective seed dispersers in the history of the cotton plant. The covenant that cotton had made with the wind was reinterpreted and elevated by humans into a covenant between species. Cotton gave the language of softness to humanity for clothing, and humanity, in return, gave cotton its greatest chance at survival and expansion. So, every time you wear a piece of clothing made from cotton, you are not just wearing clothes. You are wearing the result of an ancient covenant, reinterpreted by your ancestors. You are part of a grand relationship between a plant that wanted to fly and a creature that learned to weave that dream into warmth. Chapter 7: Three Philosophies of the Wild: the Tower, the Carpet, and the Spear. After we had learned languages to communicate with other beings, the language of taste, fruit, the language of beauty, flowers, and the language of softness, cotton, our great consciousness returned to the most fundamental question: what should our self be like? 1. The philosophy of the tower, the tree. This is the philosophy of ambition, patience, and investment in the future. Why so tall? To breathe the sun. Your question is absolutely correct, but we don't breathe gas like animals. We breathe sunlight. It is our sole source of energy. In a dense forest, the fiercest competition is the war for light. The tallest tree is the winner. It receives the full sunlight and casts its shadow over its competitors below. Height is power. It is a declaration of victory in the slowest war in the world. Hardwood versus softwood, a strategy of time. Oh, hardwood, this is the philosophy of the patient creator. We slowly build dense, strong, and durable wood. It is a long-term investment that takes decades or centuries to create the most stable tower. This structure withstands storms and enemies. It is the creation of a fortress not easily toppled, often found in areas with relatively stable climates and time to grow unhurriedly. Oh, softwood, this is the philosophy of the fast opportunist. In lands that are cold and have short summers, we don't have time for meticulous construction. We must grow as tall as possible in a limited time. So, we create wood that is more porous, lighter, and grows faster. It may not be as strong as hardwood, but it allows us to reach for the sky before anyone else in that season. This is a bet on speed rather than durability. 2. The philosophy of the carpet, the grass. This is the philosophy that revolutionized all the rules. It is the discovery that victory does not have to come from height. The consciousness of grass watched the trees compete for height and saw their weakness. Their tall trunks were fragile. If felled or burned by a wildfire, everything they had invested would be lost. Most importantly, when large animals appeared, they grazed on the leaves and destroyed the saplings completely. Thus, the philosophy of grass was born: be rooted, not righteous. The unseen strength. Instead of pouring all our energy into building a tall trunk, we invested it underground, creating a network of roots, rhizomes, that spread out like a giant carpet. This is our true heart. The lesson of humility: we keep our growing point at the base, near the ground. When a cow or buffalo eats our tips, it doesn't kill us. It is merely a haircut. We are always ready to sprout anew. In contrast, if a young tree's top is eaten, it dies instantly. The victory of the land: we never thought of defeating trees in height, but we defeated them in occupying space. We created vast grasslands and savannas, ecosystems where trees could not take root because they were controlled by wildfires, which we can withstand, and herbivores, which we allow to eat us. We are the philosophy of surrender for survival, and in the end, we came to possess the largest expanses of land in the world. 3. The philosophy of the spear, bamboo. This is the third philosophy, the one that brilliantly fuses the first two approaches. The consciousness of bamboo is a grass that dreams of being a tree. It understands the philosophy of the carpet, so it creates a strong, rapidly expanding underground root network, just like grass. But it also yearns for the sun, like a tree. It wants height, but how can one grow tall without spending 100 years building solid wood? The answer is, emptiness is power. A spear thrust to the sky. Instead of building a solid trunk, we create hollow segments. It is the ultimate in biological engineering, a structure that is incredibly light yet strong, allowing us to grow dozens of centimeters in a single day. We don't waste time building a core, We build a tube strong enough to support itself as it shoots up towards the light faster than anyone else. Flexibility is strength. Our hollow, segmented stem allows us to bend with the wind without breaking. We do not resist, we yield. This is a lesson many strong trees never understand. Therefore, trees, grass, and bamboo are not different by chance, but are three completely different answers to the same question of life: how will you grow in this world? The tree chose to be a tower of patience. The grass chose to be a carpet of resilience. And the bamboo chose to be a spear of speed and emptiness.